All right. Welcome to the fifth hearing of the Committee's inquiry into data centres. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. And I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today or watching us online. My name is Abigail Boyd and I am chair of this committee. I ask everyone in the room to please turn their mobile phones to silent. Parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses in relation to the evidence they give today. However, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of the hearing, and I urge witnesses to be careful about making comments to the media or to others after completing their evidence. In addition, the Legislative Council has adopted rules to provide procedural fairness for inquiry participants and encourage committee members and witnesses to be mindful of these procedures. So I now welcome our first witnesses. If I could ask each of you, starting on my left, to please state your name and position title and then swear either the oath or the affirmation.
David Riley, CEO of Emergence Quantum, Professor of Physics at the University of Sydney. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you.
Hi, Professor Thomas Oakey, CTO, CSO of Emergence Quantum, and also Professor at University of Sydney Physics. I solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Fabulous. Thank you. Would you like to start with an opening statement?
Sure.
Please, go ahead.
Just an introduction to who we are. So we're physicists, both of us, and have been in the area of advanced computing, quantum computing, new computing paradigms, hardware for the both of us the last 30 years or so. So mostly in the research space as academics and members of large corporations, both here and in the United States, in the defense sector, in the case of Tom, for instance. And yeah, I think in the context of our new startup company, Emergence Quantum, we are here in Australia building out, I think, new capabilities that are already bridging to many other companies that are doing computing, advanced cryogenic computing, quantum computing systems that will become the hardware of data centers in the coming years. And our company from Australia is pioneering a lot of the hardware technology that we see on the horizon. And so delighted to tell you a little bit about that and how we see the world sort of evolving over the coming years. There's really two messages that I'd really like to get across. The first is that data centers and the technology that underpin them is very much in a state of flux. It is not business as usual. It is not a steady state situation at the moment, but the rapid growth driven by AI, driven by cloud applications through the pandemic has created a situation where we're kind of living in a brute force era. We believe that in the coming years, that brute force era will give way to a very different paradigm where a lot of the challenges, a lot of the issues that we face today are likely to give over into obviously new challenges. Aspects of power density, of water usage, of geographical location, I think will quickly evaporate, be replaced by new challenges. But I think it's very important that as we look to make policy decisions and inform government, that we're doing so with a perspective and context that it's a rapidly changing aspect. The second point is just that I think we live in a very special time where the last 70 years of computing and how computers work is in some ways coming to an end. It's coming to at least the end of chapter 1, and we stand at a place today where chapter 2 is starting. Australia traditionally, if you go back to the 60s, was in fact leading in computing at that time and built some of the world's first and largest computers in the world. But over the decades, we effectively removed ourselves from the development of that hardware. But we sort of have a second chance here, and I think that the state of New South Wales is uniquely placed in the world to seize this opportunity. And I'm happy to tell you why I have that perspective of why I think New South Wales is the epicenter of this technology going forward, and happy to provide further details as to what that means.
Thank you very much. Did you also want to make any?
I don't have any further comments.
I might just ask one and then I will throw to my colleague. the when we talk about this kind of brute force era, I guess my threshold question is, a lot of people are saying, or a lot of people I've heard say that they believe that given the pace of change in all technology and in particular in computing, that a lot of these data centers, won't be required, or they will be the sort of extent of them will be massively reduced because we'll have more efficient chips, or I don't know, whatever. I guess, what is your view on that? Is that realistic?
Yeah, my perspective, and I think we probably obviously align on this, but it'd be helpful to get both of our opinions. Yeah, absolutely. I think we see totally different technologies in the coming years as becoming critically important in a data center environment, and redefining what a data center is. So whether that's the fundamental material systems that transistors are built from, the architectures, the communication systems, but can include infrastructure like power distribution, energy storage, the thermal management and the cooling infrastructure. I think a world is coming that's not too far in the future where it's possible to build a data center in a desert environment with no cooling water, close to renewable energy sources, and be able to leverage that. So we're living in an era where it's brute force, obviously driven by, I think, the opportunity of AI, that whoever can build out a data center today sees that lead in that field, is going to be well placed and positioned to build out the data centers of tomorrow, but likely those will be vastly different technologies than what we're seeing today.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think in general, though, I'm not sure that the appetite for building larger and larger compute platforms is going to start to wane at any point. I really have not seen any evidence of that so far in the decades that have gone by so far. I think in general, the compute technology is going to change. It's going to become more efficient and have to adapt. And there's a few things in particular we might talk about today that actually are going in that direction. But that will probably only increase the appetite to build larger and larger data centers, because the optimization of performance per watt per dollar is really something that I think in general will be the thing that people really try to optimize in this case. And so once one of those things improves, whether it's performance and efficiency, then it's really just going to be about maximizing that function, right? And so I don't know whether the appetite will ever really decrease, just because efficiency has become better and chips become more efficient. So
thank you, that's useful. Mr. Buttigieg?
Yeah, I suppose mine really just follows on from that. I just want to get a feel for the physics, if you like, of in terms of how that future world might look. So if we get a chip that's a lot smaller, a lot quicker, requires a lot less heating, do you still need the storage capacity regardless, or do we live in a world where the chip just goes out into the ether and grabs things off the I suppose I'm trying to grapple with, is there always going to be a need for mass storage of data in some shape or form, regardless of the size and the efficiency of the processing?
Yeah, I think the nature of computing will require memory, for sure, and if you were to look at the underlying architecture of a machine in a data center, just like the machine in your pocket, in fact, it's the reading and writing of memory that is probably driving a lot of the power dissipation, in fact.
So that's an important point, Doctor. So essentially those data centers are just really big banks of computable memory.
In some ways, they're obviously processing that data, but that memory is absolutely critical to both the storage, the retrieval, the reading and writing of that data as you're computing, whether it's a video signal, whether it's information that's part of a database for a hospital, whether it's a government department that is retrieving information. It could also be designing new chemicals, new pharmaceuticals. So yeah, it's a vast, I think, application space.
I think actually the trend might be the opposite. That is, as David pointed out, a bottleneck, accessing memory. And typically, some of the largest data centers or usage of data, the compute ability to actually access and analyze it is minimal. They're looking at a very small subset, and that's a challenge because there's an energy requirement to actually retrieve and fetch and process data. So as computing in general and data access improves and advances, you actually will be able to analyze more data. And I think that's probably a even bigger trend is moving in that direction. Right now, you're kind of limited in some sense based on conventional architectures.
So given the thirst for knowledge, which is like infinite, the more we can store and the more we can process it, sort of leads to the conclusion that, notwithstanding the improvements in technology in terms of size and efficiency, there's probably going to be an exponential growth in data centers, is kind of like the prediction, is it?
Certainly an exponential growth in, as you say, the hunger for compute in general is growing. And I think the hardware, the data center platforms, the software layer are going to grow in proportion to that hunger. And if we can do more, and that can lead to a change in the quality of life of people, then that's going to happen. The driver's there to make that happen. Yeah.
Thanks.
I could just, Professor Riley, I want to take you up on, Dr. Riley, I want to take you up on your offer before, which is, why is New South Wales strategically placed to be at the heart of this revolution?
Yeah, thanks. It's a bold statement. There are a number of things. So obviously, the first, you could step back and say, what makes Australia and New South Wales special to build any technology? It's obviously the stable regulatory environment. You can know what to expect. It's not going to change overnight, whether that's tariffs, whether that's export control, and there's stability here and predictability. That's essential. Its place in the region, geographically, the connections are important. But I think when you come down to the technology and, in fact, the physics, there's abundant potential for renewable energy. There are a lot of photons in Australia. There's potential for solar, for wind, other forms of renewable. There's abundant potential land that could be used in future data centres. But then I think what's actually particularly interesting, and this is very much yet to happen, two things. One is Australia, and indeed New South Wales and the city of Sydney, leads in many ways the world around certain types of quantum computers that eventually will also become part of data center environments. So we're building and designing that technology. There's a number of startup companies here. There's efforts in universities. Those machines, those quantum computing machines, ultimately end up in data centers. So you can imagine building them out only eventually to not have a place to house them or hone them where they can really be put to use, where those applications can run. I think the other aspect that we really see is a world where some of the cooling issues and the performance of computing can be dramatically impacted by pivoting to an approach to effectively cooling computers using what you would call cryogenic liquids. So liquid air, if you liquefy the atmosphere, which is done routinely for various applications, things like liquid nitrogen, that can be used to also cool a computer. Computers would run faster if they could be cooled. We're artificially throttling them, limiting the speed at which they can run because they get too hot. So cooling them down, removing the heat, but then increasing the clock speed, the performance. There's a whole spectrum of technologies that then are enabled by low temperature cryogenics, materials like superconductors, and these are efforts that I think for decades, particularly in the context of US government programs, have been bubbling away and have now found, I think, utility in an era where data center scale motivates their application. If you were to ask, though, that seems like a dramatic shift in terms of technology. Are you really imagining cooling a data center and cooling computers at scale using cryogenic technology, liquid air? I think we would argue that that's inevitable. It's almost the last parameter to be able to adjust to dramatically improve compute performance. It's going to happen. What kind of skills, what know-how, what infrastructure is needed to build out cryogenics? Just so happens that coincides with exactly the infrastructure that you need to do gas mining. So if you could imagine the gas fields across New South Wales, the infrastructure, the capability, the know-how for cryogenics. When I'm taking gas out of a well, the first stage is to actually liquefy that, store that liquid, transport that liquid, and this is at minus 200 degrees. So within the state, there is, I think, already substantial capability, infrastructure, know-how in the liquefaction at scale of cryogens, whether it's natural gas, whether it's liquid air, whether it's liquid helium. We have that capability here, and because of the mining industry, we've actually been able to build that out at scale. So there's an opportunity there where you can imagine gas mining, the energy could power a data center. Equivalently, the fact that it's cold, that the gas is liquefied, as you know, in a barbecue bottle, that if you've ever experienced a gas bottle of a barbecue, it feels cold because it's at minus 200 degrees under pressure. That technology deployed now for a data center means that you could build a data center in a regional area, untethered from major water use, where there's abundant solar energy and wind energy. So it opens up a totally different paradigm. And I think, when you're looking at the sort of intersection of quantum computing and our unique capabilities here in Sydney and in New South Wales, gas mining infrastructure know-how, the ecosystem and supply chains of that cryogenic infrastructure, within that stable regulatory environment, and with companies like ourselves that are building out here in Sydney relationships and customers with Microsoft, with many other big tech players to actually develop this cryogenic computing infrastructure and technology. That's all happening and coming together in the next couple of years right here in Sydney.
Thank you. Now, in terms of that, there seems to be a lot of different balls in the air here that need to be coordinated. Are you seeing any coordination at all to try and derive that benefit for New South Wales at the moment?
It's an ongoing discussion, and again, to my first point, things are moving so quickly that I think for our experience, for many years have been part of government programs, have been part of efforts in large corporations, where if you were to look at the physics, if you write down the equations of computing, those equations have a parameter there that is the temperature. And so, it's kind of well known, has been for decades, that if you lower the temperature, there's a big opportunity. But that hasn't been done to date because, it costs energy to lower the temperature, and you would only do that if you couldn't do something else. We've now, in just the last few years, crossed into a regime where, now the appetite is there, now the business case is there, now the application in AI and cloud is there. And so, I think we stand at a point right now where those conversations are beginning, but it's moving very rapidly, and I think whoever kind of seizes that opportunity to gather those aspects together in the way that I've described is really going to lead the world in this next frontier.
And I guess last question before I hand over to... Oh, sorry.
Dr. Oki.
Oh, no
Sorry,
problem.
Dr. Oki.
Just adding to that historically, I'm from the U.S. There's been multiple kind of government initiatives to really look at next generation computing technology to address some of these challenges. It's been happening for decades, actually, but I haven't seen the same level of coordination in Australia that tries to mobilize that effort. To David's point, there's a nexus right now of a lot of things happening. The potential boom of data centers here, the vigor in the tech sector for looking at new AI, energy efficient hardware, and other modalities like quantum. You can take advantage of that all happening here at this point in time and start to build the data centers with the mindset of looking at that next generation hardware rather than just building more of the same. So that's an opportunity in time that you're not going to have too many swings at, right? And so this is really the optimal time to start to put together a coordinated strategic effort to understand how
strategy,
to be at the
perhaps.
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly a strategy. Yeah. Who would have thought? But just to that point, and look, I'm always reticent to have government particularly insert itself in an area where you've got leading technology and people such as yourselves, who I would suspect know much more than anyone in government knows about the development of this technology. What do you see the role of government being to be able to facilitate the growth of this sector and not to, in a sense, throttle it or get in the way?
I think one concrete suggestion there would be when you look at the data center providers, the infrastructure builders, companies like AirTrunk, NextDC, CDC. There's obviously a cluster of those here. We have companies that are doing, whether it's gas mining or related industries, whose supply chains have been developed over many years. They're very efficient at building out this kind of technology. There's quantum companies that are building quantum chips and designs, and then there's companies like ours that are building a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the what we call the connective tissue that bring all of these different kind of compute platforms together, united by this vision of cryogenic operation. I think the role of government there across that ecosystem is how do you get these to come together and actually coordinate and develop a vision for what could be. And I think our experience as a startup is that there's appetite there, but there's also so many incentives that a data center company is making good money doing what they're doing, and they'll keep doing that until they can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
What we'd love to do is somehow get in front of that. And traditionally, I think if you look at the role of government in almost defining that roadmap that is above or beyond that immediate short term, I think is where the opportunity is. So whether that's incentivizing all of those players collectively to come together, whether that's incentivizing data center companies to say, while you're pouring concrete and thinking about today's challenges around power and water, we want to see, and we'll incentivize you to actually start to do research and development to show that you're trying to develop new ways of solving today's challenges and build out around these. How do we incentivize that? How do we incentivize the gas industry to start to pivot the significant expertise and supply chain for these types of applications? That's a hard conversation, I think, for startups that are trying to stay alive, try to find their feet to be able to build out those bigger relationships into these larger ecosystems. I think that is a role of government, not just coordinate, but in fact incentivize the coming together of these types of consortiums.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? I mean, despite this view that if you just let things happen organically, it'll all work out, which I think any casual observer of history understands that's not actually how things work. Government's in the business of trying to coordinate the best outcome for its population. So to your points before, where do you think the value add for the state would be? For example, is it in us getting into manufacturing the processing chips as opposed to just building data centers? Is it getting into the energy efficiency to provide the cooling for the data centers? And where do you see governments need to make a decision about where to direct tax dollars to their most efficient use? Where do you see the big value add is in going forward?
I have some specific thoughts on that one, actually, and a very kind of particular aspect of it. So government historically, their grand challenges usually have driven some of the biggest technological changes in society, whether it's the internet or other things of that ilk, right? And so that type of push from the government towards a mission is a good thing to instill, because it drives an economy. But you need to have effectively a workforce and an industry that's actually innovating in that space. And so one of the gaps that I've seen coming to Australia is that there's education, and then there's companies making product, but that professional R&D ecosystem that really can actually drive the whole country's expertise level and be world leaders in this, that needs to develop. And so in other countries, you'll have a large enough budget such that is a competitive area where you breed the best. Iron sharpens iron in that case, and you've got the most competitive research in that area driving innovation in that sector. And I think that's a good way of actually staying ahead of the curve, where the dollars could go in that type of investment, have competitive R&D, not just productization of things, but really build up that innovative ecosystem. That will make a huge, long-lasting change, I think. And so there's an opportunity right now around this to do that. And so David has mentioned a whole bunch of different technological areas, and even connecting dots between industries that don't even know they could be force multipliers. And how do you actually go through the rigor of understanding whether it's engineering possibility, like you're defying physics, and then where is that money to actually create and drive that work, right? It's not going to be just driven by the companies too. I think government has a critical role there. So
Can I just clarify, sorry, for my own understanding. So the connection, I guess, between quantum and data centers is that the development of quantum technology is also reliant on cooling. And so if we have data centers using cryogenic cooling and getting that whole sort of sector developed in New South Wales, and that would then have a beneficial effect for the development of quantum as well. Is that correct?
There's a few aspects. The first is that obviously nobody really, apart from the physicist, cares exactly how it all works in a data center. They care about what the application is, and I'm going to use a computer to solve a problem, whether that's in healthcare, in building new pharmaceuticals, whether that's in solving transport problems, whatever it is. Care about the application, care about the outcome. Underneath it, there is certain types of processes and certain physics that is better suited and more efficient at solving certain types of problems. And so, an example today, of course, you see GPUs, which originated as graphics processing units, but are now very much the backbone of AI. And then there's CPUs, central processing units, that are a different computer architecture. In a data center, both of these types of chips work together, and the application is divided between them. So you can imagine extending that, what we would call heterogeneous computing, to include now a quantum accelerator. Certain types of problems that involve quantum mechanics or can be projected onto quantum mechanical descriptions are going to be efficiently solved with a quantum computer. But as you point out, all of the approaches today that people are pursuing in order to build out quantum computers have at their core substantial cryogenic infrastructure. And I think what we see is an opportunity where it's not just that data centers that have CPUs, GPUs that are handling that workload with a quantum processor in the data center, high bandwidth connections between those worlds, but that there's in fact a common backplane almost of cryogenics that accelerates today's what you might call conventional computing infrastructure, as well as starts to build out the foundation infrastructure that you absolutely need when quantum starts to get on its feet.
So what are the current workloads that a data center would be running at the moment that a quantum chip would do instead, I guess, and would it make it more efficient?
Yeah, it's you have.
Yeah, the technology as it stands, having a quantum system, they're not at scale to actually more efficiently run any batch of problem or any subset at the moment. The vision is that they will, and there's a very specific subset of problems that it will improve the time to solution, right? And that's the biggest metric. There's certain problems that just take a very long time on conventional computing technology, and so you're reducing the time of compute, and so you make it a problem that's in principle solvable in a real scenario, a real world scenario. So it's useful computing, right? So that right now, it spans a whole bunch of different application areas, but that's a huge area of research for quantum computing, is finding the right type of application where there is this speed up. And sometimes it really depends on who you are. If you're an industry that cares about a 2 to 5% increase in efficiency of some optimization problem of distributing product or something like this, and it's a logistics issue, if that 2% is equivalent to a large increase in gross revenue, then it's worth it, right? But for other applications, a 2% increase in efficiency of solving something doesn't help you. Like if a problem is hard enough that it takes several years on a conventional computer to solve, and you only shave off 2% of that, that doesn't buy you anything, right? So I think the current state is really finding out those killer applications where the system sizes are going to be able to provide that type of speed up and match to the type of customer that would want to implement that. So there's an application aspect and a sort of a reward aspect for putting the amount of money to invest into that. So
Okay, but we're not going to be using like AI inference and things. Quantum chips aren't going to be used for that.
AI, conventional computing, AI, and quantum all sort of work in concert together. It's not as if quantum computing will replace a lot of the function of conventional and AI. It'll solve a subset of problems which, like I mentioned, they just aren't efficiently solved on conventional computing systems. So it's just a subset of problems. So I think the big thing though is that David was mentioning that there's a approach to actually improving computational efficiency now by doing some of the things we're talking about, like cooling computing platforms. So there's almost a win-win story here where you're building towards this future that is quantum, right? It's a necessity, but at the same time, what you're doing is not waiting for that problem to be able to be solved by that larger scale quantum system. You're actually improving computational resources and power along the way. And so if that future never materializes, you haven't actually done the wrong thing. You've actually moved down the technological path that is progressing your computational efficiency and power, right? And so that's why we pretty strongly agree on having this position where it's not just focused on what is your quantum computer going to do for you today, and that's almost always the question. And I totally appreciate your question there, but I think our focus is the other direction. We don't know that answer quite yet, like what part it's actually going to be best at, and it would be presumptuous to actually state that we know exactly what that problem is. You may hear a lot of answers to that, but I think our position is not that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say we're perhaps a little unique and have some battle scars of 30 years doing quantum computing that, the elephant in the room, to be blunt about it, with quantum computing is that on one hand, the underlying physics is remarkable and suggests an incredibly powerful technology and computational technology that could find new chemicals, materials, whether that's in medicine, whether that's in manufacturing. The potential is there, but when you start to ask specific questions as to, well, what do you really mean? The answer is we don't know, and it's equivalent to, I don't know, asking, in 1955, what computers are going to be good for. Can you imagine what we're using them to do today? And we're sort of been in this era for a reasonable amount of time. Our perspective, I think, is that you want to continue to build out quantum. There is real potential there, but if we can do that in a way that we're, as Tom says, let's say even incrementally, but still improving the incumbent mainstream technologies of computing. We're making them more efficient, we're making them faster. And as we're doing that, those technologies are laying that foundation for quantum. Then that's a much easier story. As quantum matures, we figure out really what the killer applications are. We're also building out all of the necessary infrastructure, and that's very much our strategy.
To your earlier point.
Just quickly, do you mind if I jump in?
Go
Is that
ahead.
okay? Thank you. I just had a couple of questions. We heard from Dr. Souquet about a lack of compute power in Australia in general, that we really suffer from that currently. And I'm wondering if you could speak about the relationship with sovereign capability and national security that you think data centers and quantum have. And also if you could expand a bit on just how unique that opportunity in New South Wales really is, and why our local infrastructure in Sydney in particular is so unique worldwide, like something that we have to not only protect but actually enhance if we're going to make the most of what we've got, and not kind of damage or destroy, waste the opportunity that has been created over the last 3 decades.
Yeah. Do you want to take the first one on sovereign compute?
Well, I think there's, if I understand the first question correctly, is currently there's a gap in our compute power. Why is it so necessary to actually rectify that? Why can't we rely on global resources, other compute power in the U.S., other data centers within Asia? So there's obviously national security aspects, which for a long time in the U.S., I was working for the intelligence community, and there was a huge push to have that sovereign capability for secure compute, data analysis, other aspects of national security, which in this day and age is critical to have. If that driver is not there for your country, I would be surprised. I mean, that would be one of the major reasons I would say that you would want to have those resources, and why other governments were investing so heavily in it. And so having control locally over that capability, those facilities, the security aspects of those facilities physically, but also from an IT and cyber perspective is core. So whether from an economic standpoint, as the world grows and its compute power or desire for compute grows with it, where does that resource lie now, I guess, is another question from an economic perspective. If this is the next boom for growth of not manufacturing capability, but compute as a commodity, are you being left behind if you don't compete there? So there's an economic and I would say geopolitical really strong reason to have to fill that gap. And so I guess that would be my answer for the first one. Maybe David wants to take the
Just to add to
second
that,
one.
I mean, obviously you'd be deeply aware of the recent situation with Anthropic, pausing on the global access to those models. Ultimately, Australia and the people of Australia want to benefit from the applications that emerge from advanced computing, whether we call that a data center, whether we call it, I think, the surrounding technologies that cluster because we've got that data center strategy right. I mean, I think that's really important, that if you say it's cooling technologies, it's companies building and designing chips, AI accelerators, they're clustering around where those technologies end up, in that data center environment. So I think we want to be able to, from a sovereign capability point of view, see those applications return to Australia. If we want to export them, that's great as well. But we do want to be, in a position where we're able to independently stand on our own 2 feet in terms of this critical technology. And today it may still feel that this is, I think, to some people, it's maybe not so apparent how much of our everyday life is critical and depends on these technologies, but I think over the coming years, we're going to just see an exponential growth in that dependence.
There's one extra point related to what David's saying. The nexus of being able to really ride on the wave of data center growth in Australia. If we are not actually building, say, hardware, I don't mean manufacturing capability or capacity, but really the knowledge and the ability to build hardware that will be used in those systems. There's an opportunity to do that now in Australia. That means that IP sits here, that knowledge, that know-how. That's really quite a big shift, right? If you can say that now that's here domestically, and it's sitting in data centers not only in Australia, but now it's being sought after globally, right? So
we need to learn the lesson of solar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. To your second question, what is it truly that what's the opportunity for New South Wales, and what is it that makes it unique? From the perspective of data centers, and I think what we're talking about in a lot of ways is somehow broader than that, and really involves this larger research and development opportunity to develop technologies that will have application in many other areas. It could be medicine and sensing, it could be defense, but they're built around that investment and driver that is currently data centers. There are 3 key ingredients that you need for a data center. One is power, one is the communication fiber or backbone, proximity to that, and the third is security. So we've seen major efforts to build out large-scale data centers in the Middle East. I think that the world has changed, and again, these are data centers that contain enormous amounts of sovereign data as well as are underpinning critical infrastructure in our way of life. Those need to be in environments that are protected, that are safe, that are stable geopolitically. Increasingly, Australia is a destination for that. In terms of the communication proximity, that proximity to Singapore and the broader Asia countries, both in terms of supply chain that's building the hardware as well as the actual physical movement of data, there's a huge opportunity there. And then in terms of the power, I think the story at the moment is, again, that brute force epoch, but we see a world where, you can build out a very large data center in the middle of Australia, in the middle of the state, where it's an arid desert area, but the opportunity for renewable energy and enormous amounts of energy storage that again come from cryogenics changes the equation dramatically. So I think, they're the general aspects. Then I think you layer on top of that these other things that we're saying, that as technologies like quantum computing and many of the technologies that need to be developed to make quantum a reality. An example of that is materials that superconductors that are able to transport electricity without dissipation. Those materials and that technology has increasing important use in quantum computing, but could equally change the way in which we build and operate very energy efficient data centers. We're building and developing a lot of those types of technologies right here.
Can you tell me a bit more about that really unique place that Sydney has at the moment in that technological space and R&D? Like, just how unique is it that we're in this place that has a proliferation of this knowledge and work?
Yeah, it's pretty unique. I mean, I wouldn't by any means suggest that we're the only game in town. It's a highly competitive space internationally, but I do think that we have here a critical mass, particularly in the Sydney area. But you can look across the country at other efforts. But within that Sydney area, there is really substantial investment from government over many years that has built a highly educated, skilled workforce here, and you're seeing many startup companies that are now trying to leverage that. I think without blowing our own trumpet too much, I think as an example, we're a startup company that effectively was founded a year ago. And where our business model is building the technologies. We're not building a quantum computer, but we're building out many of the other layers that we think are needed, the other infrastructure systems, the control systems, and so on. We're a company that has been able to effectively support itself and feed itself from revenue that we get from customer interactions, where our customers are the worldwide ecosystems interested in quantum computing. The biggest companies building the biggest quantum computers are employing us to develop that technology, and give you many examples of who those are, as well as companies that are not doing quantum but are doing advanced computing, sensing, and so on. And so, I think that's in some ways an example of what's happening here right in Sydney is a company that's standing up and able to really, I think, pull in significant revenue and develop that critical IP and develop the know-how and train the people right here. And that's one example. There are others around the city.
Can I just go back to your earlier point about R&D, and I think the point you were making was that we're actually maybe better off pulling back and looking at where the base level of knowledge is to secure our future, because it's just such a vast unknown quantity in terms of quantum computing and all the rest. If there was one takeout, then do you think governments should be perhaps thinking about fostering R&D by, it's a bit of a rhetorical question for you guys, but maybe people should be doing physics and engineering degrees instead of computer coding degrees, for example?
Look, you could take a very cynical view of AI and data centers and simply say that, look, we're living in an era where there is enormous investment. There is enormous investment opportunity. and whoever is well placed to receive that investment and turn that into R&D is going to benefit. Maybe that R&D has some impact on the future of data centers. Maybe that R&D is lifting the broad base of technologies in our economy. So I think that opportunity is ours in this state at the moment. The biggest AI companies, the biggest data center companies want to build out here. And I think the more that we start to, as you say, build out that R&D base of know-how, of capability, that just makes it all the more enticing, along with all the many other sort of physical reasons that we articulated.
So maybe one way to look at it, partly what I was saying was, sometimes it's good, I think, to really look at solving a problem rather than, say, the government goes out and says, well, give me your best ideas in this very broad space and we'll see how to commercialize it. More like, we want to advance computing. We see this from deep analysis. I understand that takes work, but like, say there's a problem that you want to solve in computing and put your energy towards that, and say have competitive applications for research and build that R&D core around solving that problem. So I'm used to that world where there's a problem you're solving. You bring your best ideas to the table to solve that. It's been different here where it's you don't have that approach where it's like, okay, I think whether it's the problem doesn't want to, like, people don't want to disclose what that problem is, or people don't know what the problem is. It could be one of those two, or another reason. The point is that you can approach it, and the government could approach it in that way, where they want to enter into a sector. They see a core problem that could be gathered by lots of information gathering, talking to companies like us, identify that, and then really push to make sure that Australia, New South Wales, whomever, is leading in that area. And then what you're going to do is have a competitive push towards that. And that's going to spawn whatever it is, if it's engineers or physicists or architects, computer architects, or whatever skill is needed to actually make that happen is actually more important than saying, oh, you should do physics, or you should stay
that's helpful. Thank you. Yep.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. To the extent that there were questions taken on notice, or there are supplementary questions coming from the committee members, the committee secretariat will be in touch. But thank you very much. That concludes our time with you.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. We now welcome our next witness. If I could ask you to please state your name and position title, and then swear either the oath or the affirmation.
Sure. Douglas McCloskey. I'm the Program Director of Energy and Water Advocacy at the Justice and Equity Centre. I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Fabulous. Thank you. Would you like to commence with a short opening statement?
A very short one, yeah, just to provide a bit of context. The Justice and Equity Centre works to represent and advocate for the interests of New South Wales households in their equitable access to affordable and sustainable energy and water services. This is the focus of our interest in data centres and this committee's consideration of appropriate frameworks to govern their development and operation. As noted in our submission to this process, frameworks governing the development and operation of data centres must be capable of preventing and mitigating risks and impacts on the community and ensuring strong net benefit to the community from the development of data centres. This means moving beyond narrow assessments of potential dollars investment or jobs created. It means assessing impact on energy and water system efficiency and security, the community and the environment. And it means having robust frameworks in place to ensure data centres only proceed where they are designed to operate to high standards of efficiency, support and are powered by renewable energy and utilise recycled water, avoid or minimise additional demand on constrained essential systems, don't involve increased costs and risks to the community, and respond to and meet the needs and interests of the community in which they are located. This also requires recognition that good outcomes and genuinely valuable data centre opportunities will not eventuate without these robust frameworks. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I know just from speaking with people in around Ryde and Lane Cove and places like that that have already had a few data centres built and have some more sort of in the works. There is a concern around a lack of transparency about what that means for not just the consistency of their water and energy access, but also what it's doing to their bills. Is that, do you have any reflections on that? Do you have any experience with that sort of concern?
I can't speak to the specifics of those circumstances, but I can say that while data centres in some form are not new, that the new attention on them and the rapid rise of their prevalence and the significant uptick in the development proposals has certainly drawn attention to them for the community, and that has, I think, very reasonably raised valid concerns, and also, as often occurs in this case, drawn a lot of attention of concerns that may be less warranted. But I think what that does do is highlight the need for there to be real clarity around how data centres are considered and how their development and operation is assessed and approved, so that the community can have confidence that the potential impacts have been understood, and that they have an opportunity to understand what it does and doesn't mean for their community. Because I think it's fair to say, while there are potential impacts on water and energy systems at large and on a regional basis, particularly in water, that's unlikely to be on a localised level. So those immediate concerns are potentially not well founded. But I think rather than blame people for their valid concerns, it's much more about putting attention on what we do need to do to ensure that people have the transparency and the confidence required to have trust that these sorts of developments are in their interest.
It's difficult to blame people for getting, the wrong end of the stick sometimes when they don't actually have a view of what the stick looks like.
Exactly.
But things are very sort of secretive around data centres. One of the recommendations that you make is in relation to sort of acknowledging that data centres aren't a homogenous class of infrastructure and require this differentiated assessment based on their function and purpose. And that's something that we've been trying to grapple with as a committee as well. In terms of, the sort of consumer aspect of that, do you think that there is an ability to meaningfully consult with community when they don't know what the particular use of the centre is for?
Look, I think it's fair to say, and I'll just at the outset, we aren't deep experts in data centres. The degree to which we understand the nature of data centres and their variabilities and their impact is really, as I noted, focused on energy and water systems. And I think at the outset I would say, if we expect the community to be able to engage and police data centres themselves, I think that's probably unreasonable. I think they are going to rely on there being consistent and transparent systems to undertake that. That will include appropriate consultation up front to understand the nature of the community and what their particular needs might be. But I think if we expect communities to be able to police in detail proposals, that's unfair on the community, and I think unreasonable. But again, I would come back to what we sort of think when we sort of say that there needs to be a recognition that there is a wide variability in data centre typologies and applications and setups. It's about having the frameworks for guiding their development really focus on what outcomes we do and don't want them to deliver for the community. If we set the terms of the impacts that we don't want to have, and that being set by communities' concerns and needs, then there is an ability for the data center sector as a whole to be able to know what parameters they must meet to develop into. And I think when I close my statement to say we can't assume that cost or other broad determinants of investment will be enough to police the development of data centres, the amount of money being thrown around in that domain so far outweighs the cost of energy or the cost of water that there isn't necessarily a really strong driver to efficiency. So we need regulatory and other guidance frameworks to do that for the community.
Thank you. Ms.
Thank you
Monroe?
so much for your submission. It seems pretty sensible to me. I was wondering if you were aware of any community benefit sharing type schemes or any in New South Wales, or any examples of where data centre operators have somehow invested in local communities as part of gaining social licence?
Not specifically for data centres, but I do think there are good sort of examples of similar types, whether they'd be in the community energy space and the renewable energy space, where we understand that social licence is not a thing that you can measure. It's something that you often only know about once you've lost it, which really requires the investment in understanding it up front. So I think there's probably data centres are a really good example where proponents understanding the views of the community and the needs of the community up front and doing some meaningful engagement with them to see what their preferences are. One can help guide the development of the infrastructure itself, but can also sort of say, we understand that the needs of the community are such that we have a potential role to play to demonstrate our good faith. And it can be in things like, while we don't necessarily recommend on-site renewables as a requirement for data centres, it may be a sense of saying, look, we have assets and infrastructure on site where we can potentially share benefits of our own storage that's done for backup, or our own on-site renewables that's done for, that are relatively rounding error for our own needs, but we can support the local community as a sign of that good faith to maintain that social licence. I think, the one takeaway I would have is that we would very much encourage, again, frameworks that if they don't require it, put a strong incentive for data centre proponents, particularly at the upper end of potential impacts on local communities, that they either be required or encouraged to do that kind of engagement to share benefits with the local community.
Yeah. The sum total of your recommendations seem to suggest that you would like a data centre strategy, which is something that we've been concerned isn't forthcoming.
And look, absolutely, and we understand this is such a fast-moving area. That it is difficult. There's not necessarily easy things to take off the shelf to say this is what we should do. There are good examples internationally of avoiding the worst impacts and the type of focus on value that we're talking about. We know that in Singapore and other land-constrained areas, there's been a real focus on, we don't want all data centres, we want the highest value applications. I think that's a version of the type of thing that we're talking about. I guess what we've noted is Australia has a fairly poor record of setting really durable terms up front. We sort of chase the money and set pretty low standards for what value we realise with that. I think it's sort of well understood that we've got a history of digging up stuff and selling it overseas when we could process and manufacture it and sell it for much higher value. I think there's an analogy there for data centres that it may very well be that setting really clear terms for what we want data centres not to deliver, and also having a framework which can show what we do want them to deliver, means that we actually realise the highest value opportunities of the types of things that you've been having people talk to the committee about.
Yeah, definitely. And are there any specific organised groups that are operating statewide that you're aware of that are protesting against data centres specifically? Is that culture emerging?
Look, I think to go to the earlier point, very reasonably, in the type of environment we have, where the frameworks for approving them and building them, and particularly also where we have attention drawn to something which is not new, it is certainly newly significant, but it is not new. There's often surprise in some communities to know that there is a data centre in the community, and they hear all of the stories and all of the valid concerns and the wash of other issues in there. And I think that very reasonably drives concern and anxiety in the community. And I go back to sort of saying, while I think some of those involve concerns that are not particularly productive or potentially not founded in the real concerns, we don't think that's the fault of the communities at play. That's, I think, the very nature of the way these things are developed. So in answer to your question, I think I don't know of well-organised campaigns or groups across the state or the country, but there are certainly many local groups that are organising around their own issues and their own concerns. I know I sit on a number of advisory committees for energy and water businesses, and we know that obviously they are noticing a lot of the concern and working to try to present those concerns in these forums such as this. And again, I would go back to sort of saying we're still at the point where clear, decisive action to build trust with the community, that we're taking this on board, and we are building a framework to make sure that data centres are developed in line with community values and in the community interest. I think still has the opportunity to arrest some of that development of anxiety in the community.
Thank you.
Mr. Buttigieg.
I'm fine at this stage.
The point you made in I don't know if it was in your opening statement or in one of the answers that you gave, in relation to, I guess, this kind of abundance mindset, which brings us back to something we were talking about in right at the beginning, I think on our day one of our hearings, where, there's so much money sloshing around in the ALI field in particular, that we then seem to have a lot of people wanting to just kind of, come along and throw their money at a data centre, and because it's happened, or the growth at least has happened so rapidly or unexpectedly, for those of us that maybe weren't paying enough attention, we then have not enough regulation to sort of drive a scarcity and innovation kind of mindset. Would you agree with that, if I put that the right way, or is it?
I think broadly that it's generally the way that we sort of as a community tend to approach regulation, is we tend to wait for problems to arise and then tend to try to reverse regulation to undo or mitigate those problems, which is generally a pretty poor practice. But I think in this case, it's quite problematic because things have happened so quickly, and internationally the large sums of money, mostly debt, that are involved in this question mean that things can change so quickly that by the time regulation catches up, it may already be too late to mitigate some of the impacts. And I think in the wash of these discussions about the huge sense of opportunity of investment and sums of money, which are, on an Australian scale, enormous, can, I think, hide some of the risks that come with that opportunity, not least of which that, while we see a trajectory of AI expanding unchecked exponentially into the future, there are very strong possibilities of corrections which mean that there are quite large risks to investments that are made, and where those investments that have been made have connections to the essential energy and water infrastructure, that is a risk to the community. And I think that sort of again highlights the need for us for regulation to go in advance of the opportunity and to help shape that opportunity. Again, we come back to as previous speakers have no doubt said there, and some of the committee's members have noted, there are unique opportunities in Australia, or great values to be realised in Australia, and we should have confidence that setting terms to investment and ensuring it meets our needs will not scare it off. It'll just ensure that that investment will meet the needs of the community and won't increase risks to the community of long-term costs or long-term security risks to energy and water. I think what we would caution, again, as it was in my opening statement, is that because we've heard these arguments that, oh, well, look, these are competitive businesses and they have an incentive to be efficient and to minimise costs. And what we note with our expertise in energy is that even if they were constantly paying the absolute peak price of energy costs, which nobody does, that would still be a rounding error compared to the costs to the amount, the sums of money that they are being invested. So we cannot rely on efficiency to drive outcomes, to drive the innovation. And we think that there is, as there always is, an important role for regulatory frameworks to guide where we want innovation to go. We want that innovation to go to the most efficient data centres, to data centres which deliver the highest value uses and provide the best co-benefits to the community, including things that we cited around energy system flexibility, which can actually support a faster transition to renewables rather than be a huge risk to it.
I think the way you framed that when you said, no, I forgot, I've lost the words now, but you said effectively to structure around that opportunity, or to, I can't remember the words that you used, but it made me sort of reflect on, I guess a lot of what we've heard from community groups is that they don't know what their particular data centre that's being proposed in their area is for. They don't, it's all very different in terms of what the energy source is going to be and how much energy and what the water efficiency is, and it's all just so different depending on each proposal, that I guess if you had this, as Ms. Munro keeps saying, a strategy and an actual, a framework, then you would get presumably a benefit for the industry as well, and that people would know what they're sort of getting and expecting.
And without wanting to speak for other people who may have testified, our observation is that the industry itself wants clear standards and regulations so that they can be assisted to fulfil the role that they believe they have, and the opportunities that they can see, and we would concur with that. I think to some degree there is an assumption that regulatory framework is anathema to investment, and it's just not true. And look, we see it in the energy and water space that regulation aids investment. It provides certainty that guides investment and innovation. And I think we should think of the type of strategic and regulatory guidelines that a lot of people are talking about as a way to maximise our opportunity, not to curtail it.
I've got a couple more questions. So one of them was in relation to the use it or lose it suggestion, and sort of milestones for data centres to address, phantom demand and protect against land banking. And I think we've also, the inquiry's heard quite a bit about the amount of stress that people go through trying to get their heads around a development in their particular area and oppose it or try to get sort of better parameters for it, only to find that it was never going to go ahead. And also how that then clogs up the planning system for those more certain projects. I guess though, would we end up perversely with the situation if we had a use it or lose it policy, that we would then end up with sort of forcing data centres to be developed that maybe we wouldn't end up actually needing?
Look, I think there's a difference between trying to mitigate the risk to the community of things in the data centre and technology development industry impacting on key infrastructure and community needs, and trying to have our data centre policy manage all risks in international technology and AI sector, which is quite frankly not going to happen when we are a small to middling power at best. I think what we can do is say an appropriately robust gateway for developments helps shake out the speculative investments, and helps ensure that whatever makes it through the first gateway is robust enough that it is unlikely to fall over, that it is unlikely to be ill-considered, it is unlikely to be the result of more speculative terms. I think then, we raised the ideas of use it or lose it or other provisions as examples for what's required. And it's fair to say, and we're happy to own, that these aren't developed proposals and really practical, implementable things. But I think there are analogies for those sorts of provisions in some resource stakes where, you have time to explore and prove and develop up a proposal and use it, or else you lose the opportunity. Those sorts of examples are reasonable to say that in conjunction with robust gateways, that if a proposal starts, that we have reasonable faith that it will be genuine and will proceed, and that if it doesn't within that period, that capacity or that scope is then provided back to others to utilise. Because what we recognise is that while it's not our focus, that there is an opportunity in data centres. Our focus is obviously on the community and households. We're not talking about preventing data centres or limiting them. We're talking about ensuring that they develop, that they can optimise their opportunities in a way that also optimises opportunities for the community.
And I guess perhaps the other way to do that then would be to require more of an upfront cost to the proponents. And there's a couple of things that leap out in your submission about this is, the idea of bidding for capacity, which I think is similar to what they had in Singapore, this kind of like allocating capacity. But I like that sort of bidding for capacity, but particularly if you then had to put a chunk of that money in to the government's coffers sort of early on, which would perhaps, that would be good. But then the other issue that keeps coming up is the cost to consumers down the track of network augmentation with whether it's energy or water for proponents who then don't end up going ahead, and then that sort of cost being socialised through consumers.
There's a number of things in there. Again, the idea around bidding for capacity, I think, was an example for us of things that could be considered, particularly for areas of highest value. We were noting that data centre operators have particular parameters that are most valuable to them, and I think the previous speakers spoke about them, is a proximity to international connections and potentially workforces or development, etc. There is scope to map those areas and have that mapped against capacity for both energy and water, and to have potentially schemes which allow people to bid for that. Again, this is not intended as a specifically well-developed proposal, but something that has reasonable analogies elsewhere, and that could be considered as a way of trying to optimise the value, particularly in high-value areas. I think the second, and it's a related but distinct issue, is that for the process of any data centre, they should be, like any large connecting user, should be paying for their full connection costs up front. We noted that should be both deep and shallow connection costs. For a lot of connection agreements, what they call shallow costs is just the immediate direct impacts on either the energy or water network are paid for by that proponent, and that might be to the nearest substation or others. Some of the scale of the data centre proposals that are currently in train or being talked about, and also their cumulative scale, has much deeper impacts that run right up the transmission system line. And so we want to make sure that whatever scheme is put in place and whatever requirements are put in place can also recognise those further upstream impacts at the point of connection. I think what we would say is, and we think there's probably good recognition at both a New South Wales level and at an Australian government and regulatory level, that the initial connection costs should be borne by the proponents. I think what's not well recognised is that that's only part of the picture. That manages some of the immediate cost risks of these developments, imposing costs on consumers straight away and imposing risks that they don't, they require upgrades and then they're not there to deliver them. And what we're left with is a white elephant or assets that consumers have to pay for. So that's obviously one problem. But the second problem, or issue rather, is to deal with their ongoing needs. I think this is where we highlighted the need to build in either requirements or incentives for both renewable contracting, but also flexibility services, noting that some data centres have a reasonable degree of flexibility, which is incredibly valuable at the type of scale that they have, either to help the system balance itself, so help maintain elements of system security, but also potentially to mitigate wholesale prices, which have really large-scale impacts on the energy costs more broadly. So we think that it's important to recognise that whole picture, that it's about capacity generally, it's about upfront costs, and it's about ongoing use as well.
Thank you. Any further questions from members? No,
That's good for me.
Well, that does bring us to time. Thank you so much
No worries.
for your attendance and for your submission. To the extent there were questions taken on notice or any supplementary questions, the committee secretariat will be in touch. But that concludes our time with you. We're going to take a afternoon tea break, and we'll be back at 2:45 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back. We now welcome our next witness. If I could please ask you to state your name and position title, and then swear either the oath or the affirmation.
Thank you very much. Name is Kylie Hargraves. I'm Deputy Chair for Regional Development Australia, Sydney. I've selected an affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And would you like to start with a short opening statement?
I would. Thank you very much. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Regional Development Australia, New South Wales. While I am the Deputy Chair of RDA Sydney, I'm appearing today on behalf of the full network of RDA New South Wales committees and the communities that we represent across regional and rural New South Wales, both within and outside renewable energy zones. Regional communities understand that data centres are now critical national infrastructure. They support essential government services, AI, defence capability and the digital economy, but their arrival in regional areas does bring unique, often overlooked challenges that require deliberate policy settings if we are to secure long-term regional benefit and minimise local impacts. Beyond the well-known issues of water, energy and land use conflict, communities are increasingly concerned about digital load concentration, where a single hyperscale facility could draw more electricity, telecommunications backhaul and emergency response capability than an entire regional town. If one operator becomes the dominant user of local infrastructure, it can crowd out other businesses and leave councils exposed to costly rectification, maintenance or upgrades if those operators later relocate or consolidate. There are also emerging thermal and microclimate effects from large-scale heat rejection, which can affect agriculture, viticulture and sensitive ecosystems, yet may not be adequately modelled or considered in approvals. The data centres introduce new fire, battery storage and hazardous material risks that many regional brigades are not yet trained or fully equipped to manage. These challenges do not argue against data centres, they argue for getting planning, sequencing and governance right. When policy settings are right, the opportunities are significant. International experience from rural Ireland, Scandinavia and the American Midwest show the importance of early community engagement, circular economy planning and transparent long-term infrastructure agreements. Regional New South Wales can learn from these lessons and avoid the pitfalls that others have faced. There is a major opportunity in attracting non-latency sensitive compute, AI modelling training, scientific simulations, bulk data processing and archival storage. Locating this capacity in regional New South Wales can strengthen Australia's digital sovereignty, reduce pressures on metropolitan grids and support sectors such as agri-tech, defence analytics and space technology. Data centres can also catalyse long-term workforce development in regional New South Wales. With early partnerships between operators, TAFEs and universities, they can create training pathways in electrical trades, cybersecurity, HVAC, digital operations and critical infrastructure management. These are high-value, future-focused skills that support not only data centres but defence, advanced manufacturing, clean tech industries and others. When planned well, data centres can help build the skilled regional workforce that New South Wales will need to rely on for decades. Importantly, regional New South Wales is home to 5 renewable energy zones, providing a unique opportunity for data centres to co-locate near new renewable generation and firming assets. This does align strongly with the New South Wales Electricity Infrastructure Roadmap, which seeks to coordinate generation, storage and transmission investment. With the right incentives, data centres could act as flexible electricity users that could help stabilise the grid and support renewable integration. But to ensure that this development strengthens rather than strains regional communities, RDA New South Wales recommends a regional impact test for hyperscale proposals. This could be conducted within the New South Wales planning system or independently by a body such as New South Wales Productivity Commission or Infrastructure New South Wales in partnership with local communities, councils and RDAs. An independent test would ensure that cumulative impacts on housing, workforce, infrastructure and emergency services are assessed consistently and transparently. We also recommend mandatory circular economy planning, coordinated infrastructure sequencing, local benefit agreements, and a whole of government regional data infrastructure strategy that can ensure data centres complement rather than compete with agriculture, manufacturing and emerging clean tech industries. In closing, regional New South Wales is ready to play its part in Australia's digital future. With thoughtful policy, data centres can become anchors of new regional industries, not isolated enclaves of global infrastructure. RDA New South Wales looks forward to working with the government, industry and local communities to ensure the benefits of the digital economy are shared widely across regional New South Wales. Thank you.
Thank you. Someone want to kick us off?
Sure.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. I guess that in terms of data centres and what we've known so far, we've largely known them to be in metropolitan areas and around the Sydney CBD. I know there have been a number of proposals that have now started to emerge, and we've heard about them in the inquiry as well in regional New South Wales. At the moment, do you have any appreciation for how many data centres are proposed in regional New South Wales?
No, I don't. I'm assuming the major portal, New South Wales Planning Portal, would be able to give us some visibility on that. It does tend to be long conversations, so I'm not entirely clear as to how many of those are actually in the planning pipeline at the moment.
Thank you. And I know, are there any sort of hotspots, so to speak of, like we know in Sydney around the sort of the Artarmon to Macquarie Park band, we're seeing around Western Sydney now as well. In regional New South Wales, are there any areas where we're starting to see a concentration of data centres emerge?
Yeah,
or
so
proposals?
it's a really good question. We did ask our committees. I think it's early days for a lot of them. The fear is around is more around inside or outside a renewable energy zone.
Yep.
So that seems to be a hot spot in the sense that there is concern that the areas outside of a renewable energy zone will already have problems with energy. Most regional areas have concerns around water. Obviously, the land use competition, there's a sense that there's more land out there, but obviously the land is competing for agricultural and other regional uses. So it's more a wait and see. We're cautiously optimistic. We're not currently seeing any immediate pressures outside of what you're seeing already from some of the regional areas and from water stressed areas already.
So is there more support for them in the reses? And being co-located effectively?
Yes,
along those transmission
the
lines?
sense from the communities
Yep.
is that being co-located in a res means that you have more government coordination, more focus, more access to solutions for particularly energy, obviously,
Yep.
but not just for energy. There is a sense that particularly when you're outside of the reses, when you're looking at some of the things like the telecommunications backhaul, there's in the renewable zones, you actually have a focus on that because a number of the renewable energy companies have to upgrade some of the telecommunications anyway for their
Yep.
own benefit. Obviously, if you're outside of that area, that co-investment in infrastructure is not happening. So there is growing concern that, again, even things like the telecommunications backhaul is going to be a real pressure point for regional areas outside of reses.
Thank you. I know there's some live proposals in the Hunter as well. I think there's one at Muswellbrook. There's one at Curry as well. I think in the old smelter site, looking at potentially taking over some of those former industrial uses that are no longer in operation. Is that something that the RDA sees as a potential benefit or a
Absolutely.
positive step forward?
Yeah, so again, a lot of those industrial sites are also setting themselves up as sort of energy hubs.
Yep.
So they have battery BESSs co-located there as well, which is also seen as a benefit because obviously the data centres have to run 24/7. And if you can actually co-locate with BESSs and other industrial land where there's already a sense of appropriate land use, then that is definitely seen as a good option. They also tend to have buffers, not always, but they often have buffers already around those industrial zones, so that again the residential areas are even a bit further away from that. Not always, but again that's another reason why that industrial area is a potential benefit.
Now, one of the other questions that sort of has been a debate in the inquiry to date has been around the skills required, and I guess there's two levels of skills. There's the skills in the construction, and we've heard some pretty compelling evidence from a range of stakeholders in terms of what we need to do to train up our construction workforce, but that we might even have some of those skills already existing here, like I think one of our previous witnesses said in terms of the gas industry, for instance, that could lower the use of water that we would have for the facilities. In terms of the IT, which I guess is the next part once they're constructed, but that IT skilled workforce, is that something that you see that regional New South Wales has the capability to deliver as well?
Certainly we'd say that the workforce has capability there and obviously needs to be trained. The challenge with the data centres is that it's not necessarily always a lot of jobs. So it's really about the multiplier effect of that data centre. So this is where we were talking about where they can actually have an alignment with, local or regional universities or TAFEs. That sort of alignment is probably more beneficial where they can actually work on data and analytics and processes that aren't so latency dependent. That's also an opportunity for sourcing some of that more scientific and health related work out there, which would actually again be very beneficial for the regions in attracting appropriate skills. So I think it's less about the data centre themselves, if I can say that, and it's more about the multiplier effect of how they could actually add to skills and new industries in those areas that in turn could also add new skills. That is really the quite interesting part for us. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hargraves.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to ask about when you're talking about the coordination of groups in regional areas to ensure that there's benefit from the data centres and they're setting up in regional areas, how do you envisage that body to, should there be a separate organisation created that would coordinate that for different parts of benefit sharing, or does it go through council, or how do you see that operating?
So I think there's two elements to it. In terms of the community benefit side specifically, I think there's a lot to be learnt from the renewable energy industry, and I think mechanisms that are similar to that, given that this is essentially, a lot of people will talk about it as being the next mining boom in terms of quantum. So I think taking the best out of the renewable energy where it's worked well, is a really
What
good...
does that look like?
So a lot of the, not necessarily the VPAs that come through the standard New South Wales planning process, but some of the res level requirements for participation in the zones, some of the benefit agreements that are done by high performing operators, and they're often in the case studies of like the infrastructure commissioner and stuff like that, which are well worth it. And the guidelines that have actually been issued for community benefit sharing. There's all those three pieces from the renewable energy I think are quite pertinent to the data industry and could be easily rectified, replicated.
What would you say about something like Energy Co being replicated, or would there be specific functions perhaps that you would see a body undertaking?
There's always a concern about creating more institutions. If they have a very clear mandate, they're resourced properly, and they can actually make decisions, then of course that's great. That sort of an energy code type model does work for that second part, which I was talking about, where we were trying to say we really need to be thinking about major infrastructure going into these regions and all the things that all of the major infrastructure needs. So if it's infrastructure New South Wales, if it's an energy co plus, what they need to be doing is going, okay, well, we're building big transport infrastructure, big renewable infrastructure, we're building big data centre infrastructure. What is required in terms of managing that cumulative effect? What is required in terms of scheduling of things like energy, water, telecommunications, and how can we sequence that so that all of those big infrastructure pieces can actually be delivered efficiently without just stressing the local community. I was about to say something a bit more colourful, but yeah, without stressing the community.
Okay. That's all from me for the moment.
So a couple of questions. The first one was in relation to, I guess, we hear about the benefits of having data centres out near renewable energy zones and being close to the source of energy. But on the flip side, we've heard that people like to have their data centres where there is really good sort of telecommunications. And this is an area I admit I am not very familiar with, but when it comes to NBN and the sort of rural parts of the network, is it feasible that we could, I guess, or maybe a way of saying it is there more work we need to do first to prepare that infrastructure to enable data centres to want to be out in
Definitely.
regions?
I think that's the issue around. So in the first instance, you can look at what we were talking about before, which was those that are less latency dependent. So you can actually put some quantum computing out there, for example, and say, okay, go and, again, this is not my subject matter area expertise, but, go and think deeply for, whatever it is, 4 hours. It's not something that the real-time latency is required. And you can actually locate that as long as you can get through the telecommunications lines. Where you need real-time latency, the telecommunications in a lot of the regional areas is not going to be able to support that without investment in upgrading it and making it able to support data centres that are more in that real-time space. So the short answer is there are definitely areas where the telecommunications would need to be upgraded to be able to support data centres.
And I guess we could do it the other way round as well. Like we keep talking about the benefit to community. That could be a potential, if the data centre operator paid for an upgrade to the telecommunications, then it would benefit the surrounding community.
Absolutely. So again, in the US, a lot of the trends are, bring your own energy, bring your own water, bring your own telecommunications type philosophies. Essentially, that boils down to, can we actually get to a net positive benefit to the community? And I think that sort of philosophy is, again, something that the regions are not exclusively asking of data centres. They would like to see that same sort of net positive coming from renewable and other major infrastructure. So it's not a data centre specific thing, but it is a fundamental philosophy change to the way that proponents go into a region, so that they think less about what they need to take to operate and more about, well, how clever can we be with our cooling technologies or whatever it might be that we can actually end up with a net positive outcome for the community.
Yeah. One of the ideas that we've heard a lot about is this idea of sort of, I guess, allocating capacity. So at the moment we have this system where it's, you effectively apply and if you tick all the boxes, then you can, get your approval for a data centre without. Previously, we've not really had much of a kind of overarching strategy or a plan. But what we've heard is that in some other jurisdictions, they have a more, I guess, regulated way of doing things where they are allocating out not just the capacity, but the capacity during a period of time. It strikes me that we could also do that here in terms of I guess, capacity within a particular area. So would there be synergies, do you think, between particularly these areas that have renewable energy projects, the sequencing, we hear a lot from regional communities about workers coming and going, they come for a period of time, they build the renewable energy, and a bit like data centres, they don't leave behind many jobs. And then all of the services and facilities that were put in place to support those workers are then, have to close down. Perhaps if we did have that sort of allocating sort of way of doing things, we could actually allocate in sequence with renewable energy projects at the same time. Is that something you think would sort of allow us to, I guess, have more of a positive impact with
Definitely.
these things?
I think that was and the question goes as to how do you do it, whether it's an Energy Code plus sort of question that we had before, but absolutely. The ability to actually schedule big infrastructure in regional areas and therefore potentially help move construction workforces around, or encourage cooperation between clusters of companies. So water is another classic. If you say, well, if we've got a strategic activation precinct at Parks, and we've got a whole bunch of industrial people out there, is there a way that we could actually sequence the activities in that precinct, for example, so that two proponents are actually co-investing into upgrading the recycled water facilities that are required to the benefit of 2 or 3 of them. And so, yes, I think anything you can do, essentially the regional communities just want a little bit of that planned sequencing and transparency, so they can actually see what's coming, where the stress points are, and they can plan their futures and their communities around that sort of visibility.
Which seems very reasonable.
Which seems entirely reasonable, exactly.
That's what we all want. Yeah.
I think on that, going back to Dr. Oakey's point in the previous session, the question should be, well, what problems are we trying to solve? If a data centre proponent comes in and says, look, we think this is a really good area, but what problems can we help you solve as a regional community? Is it a matter of that proponent holding a town hall meeting, or I know we've spoke about the more formal mechanisms that might be available, but are there ways that data centre proponents should be using existing pathways like the activation precinct model, or I don't really know how those precinct models work, but is there any...
We scrapped half of them.
Yeah.
So so if I understand the question, it's around how can the proponents actually understand what the communities need.
Yes.
I think it's very similar to the renewables, where some of the challenge is around thinking about it's proponent only. That's actually the challenge. So yes, you want best-in-class proponents to be consulting with the community, and people like CWP Renewables, who I think are now Squadron Energy, they would do that. And it's in the guidelines, so best in class will go out to the community, genuinely listen to what it is that they're trying to solve for, be creative about it, and then, they upgrade the satellite phones so that the farmers can actually check the water in their tanks, from a satellite phone rather than from actually having to walk up to see it and saving them a day's work, for example.
Yep.
So that's a given. If you want to be best in class, you need to be talking and listening to the communities about what's important to them. And that's clearly also identified in the guidelines and expected in the planning process. The challenge, I think, is how can you do that in an efficient way so that you're actually looking at the scheduled process a bit more, to avoid the proponent-by-proponent consultation model. And again, I know you've heard that in renewable energies, because the communities have been complaining about that for a while as well, which is we need to have this visible pipeline of things so that we can actually talk to the whole pipeline about what is needed over 35 years and actually, start programming the benefits to the community that way as well. And the different proponents doing different infrastructure have to pick up different parts of what the community needs. Then you have a system thinking approach to what the communities need. And if we could crack that, I reckon that would be a really impressive step forward.
What if you had a, sorry, now I'm just
No,
spitballing,
it's good.
but imagine that you had that sort of allocation model, but you could, effectively say, look, to a particular community, your renewable energy projects are coming to completion. There's capacity for you to have a data centre of, X size. Here's your allocation, community, and then the community runs like the bidding process where the proponents say, well, if you take us, then we'll upgrade your MBN, and imagine that.
That is interesting.
Yeah. You have to be environmentally friendly, and you have to do all these things. All right. Is there any questions on the side?
Stemming from that previous line of questioning that I think the chair was asking you about this trade-off between latency and renewable energy and getting the infrastructure out there. What if data centres were to be asked to contribute to a fund, which would then allow the government to maybe provide the infrastructure. So, for example, if we want them to set up in the regions, you need a whole bunch of fibre optics to go out there, and then NBN or whoever could use that money to fund that, and then that spillover effects into those towns and regions would be great because you're getting the beneficial infrastructure.
So again, I think that's very similar to what's in existence around some of the res zone participation requirements, so that proponents need to put into a fund that then in turn can actually help Energy Co and others deliver some of that required infrastructure. I'm sure the data industry is probably not going to love me for saying it, but of course, I mean, you know, the communities are going to sit there going, well, actually, if there's a way that we can actually upgrade what we need for our own infrastructure and livability in the regions, then fantastic, right? Particularly if it, telecommunications example before, if it actually pays for the telecommunication upgrades and they can actually make emergency calls, well, great, they're going to be very happy with that. So I do think all those sorts of mechanisms need to be looked at.
So that res model, that's functional from your perspective, that would work?
So I don't want to speak for every single one of my communities, but from what I understand, yes, that model is working, and people are happy with it. It is a bit more legislative from what I understand. It's actually mandatory. So it's not in that voluntary space of good proponents. It's if you're paying to play, essentially, is my understanding of the system.
Yeah. Okay.
Which.
Interesting. Any final questions? No?
Oh, good. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time. This has been incredibly useful. To the extent there are any supplementary questions, the Committee Secretariat will be in touch, but that concludes our time with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, there was a thing where they were going to
Hello.
swear in everybody anyway, for some reason, but no. Our next witness, Minister, you do not need to swear an oath or affirmation because you have sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. But would you like to start with a short opening statement?
No, I'm
at
good.
all? Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming along, and I think we've had a very interesting. This is day 5 of our inquiry. We've had a very interesting time of it, sort of working out different sort of potential policy parameters and recommendations and things. I guess my first question is around. You're obviously tapped into what's happening in other jurisdictions and federally. Is there anything that you can share with us in terms of what's going to be happening at a federal level and how that's likely to impact us here in New South Wales?
Yes, I can. I mean, there's obviously... Yes, I think my mic's working. Is that right? So I can't see the light, sorry. Yes, so there's probably... 2 things in particular you need to be aware of. The first is that earlier this year, the Commonwealth put out sort of their principles, which is in their document, Expectation of Data Centres and AI Infrastructure Developers. So that kind of sets out broad issues. The sort of 5 points in that. These are basically, the first one is, prioritising Australia's national interest, supporting the energy transition, sustainable and efficient water use. I know the committee's been traversing all of these issues. Investment in skills and workforce, research, information and local capability. So that's sort of setting out sort of broad parameters about how we would want to. Well, I think how the Commonwealth would like to coordinate across the different states. There's actually a separate piece of work that's happening with energy ministers, and I'm not sure how much the committee is across that, but it's probably more useful to you. I'm really happy to take you through it. So basically, the Energy and Climate Change Ministerial Council, which of course is all of the energy and climate change ministers with the Commonwealth, has been dealing specifically and examining the issues around energy use and data centres. At our last meeting, and this was in May, basically we have asked our officials to develop more recommendations to consider at our next meeting, which was really about sort of, again, broad principles that states and other planning systems could deal with it when it comes to energy. The first is investing in additional renewable generation and firming in their state of operation to fully offset their electricity demand. I'll just read it what it is and then sort of provide some other comment. Also provide demand flexibility services to avoid additional costs being borne by other energy users. And provide transparent reporting on energy use and emissions. We've also asked for advice from the AEMC, which of course is the Australian Energy Market Commission, which makes the rules, and on their pathways and regulatory design options, including any changes to the national electricity laws and rules, which is what they are responsible for. We've also asked the Australian Energy Regulator to progress its review on the connection charge guidelines for distribution and to progress a rule change to ensure distribution-connected data centres cover the cost of the necessary network upgrades. And we've agreed to progress rule changes to improve operational integration and visibility of data centres. Now, that, of course, sounds pretty technical. It's pretty straightforward. It's very similar to where New South Wales is thinking in terms of our discussion paper and those things, which is that consumers shouldn't have to pay more. That if you want to have a data centre, you've got to basically pay for it, not just connection charges and slight augmentations. It's sort of overall so that consumers ultimately are not having to bear increased costs. That's sort of one of the principles that's in our consultation paper as well. There's obviously, and I know that there's been some discussion about how often they're on, how much they use, those kind of things. I literally was at an energy forum earlier today, where there's sort of other rule changes that are getting progressed via sort of Transgrid, which is about dealing with that issue. So basically you've got to pay for the network upgrade that you provide is on the basis. Their suggestion is that their network upgrade is on the basis of 100% running all the time, not this sort of up and down, and that would then cover the cost so that consumers are protected. So that's, again, proceeding through a discussion and getting looked at through AEMC.
So that's that concept that, so at the moment...
I think it's called phantom load and all of that sort of stuff.
And so we are building the infrastructure to basically get us to them being able to use 100%, but then they don't use 100%, and so the cost recovery is not
correct
of the right
amount.
Right,
okay. I think that's where the whole discussion is up to. It's like, okay, can we do this with the opportunities that are there, but under what circumstances would you do it? And there's a very strong view, I think, just to be clear though, the Energy Ministers, Queensland weren't keen, but everyone else was fine on just progressing those kind of principles. But it's pretty basic. We want it to preferred to be renewable energy to actually deal with helping the build out of renewables. And then there's who pays and how.
In one of the SO52s, it might have been the lobbyist one, and apologies, I don't know if it's the first or second tranche that I read this in. The New South Wales data centre consultation paper was scheduled to be turned into guidelines by June. Obviously, that date has now passed only by 2 days, but can you tell us what the current status is there? And
well, there's been the consultation, which is important. I mean, I think, to be honest, this inquiry has also helped. It sort of helps flush out some of those issues. It's with government. We need to consider finalising that. I mean, I, of course, would hope that, like with everything pretty much, would like everything done yesterday. But it's working its way through our processes and, hopefully we'll have something soon. But I don't know what the time frame is. I'm not in control of
That's
it,
okay.
when it's coming through. Yeah.
Is there a reason why I guess it's guidelines rather than sort of mandatory rules? And I guess that's the same at the federal level as well, and that's caused some consternation.
Sure. I mean, I think it's funny actually, because this guideline issue happens a lot in sort of the EPA space. So they issue guidelines around a whole lot of things, and there's a bit of toing and froing about whether they're mandatory or whether they have to be dealt with. The way that guidelines operate, though, in New South Wales very much, I would argue, is that the guidelines sort of tell proponents what they have to address through the planning system. The idea that you have guidelines up front is so that people can hopefully prepare through that, and that's the sort of thing that's tested through the EIS and the planning system. So depending on who you talk to, people have differing views about whether, when's a guideline and when it's mandatory and all those sort of things. I mean, my experience in terms of in the EPA context is that the guidelines really tell people what they need to provide. This is the sort of stuff that gets considered through the planning system, so that it's much better if they're prepared earlier, because at the end of the day, everyone in the planning system wants the quickest process possible. If you meet the guidelines, it will be quicker.
Yeah, okay. And apologies for not knowing the answer to this, I guess, because my knowledge of planning law is not...
Yeah, I'm not the planning minister either, but
no,
I'll give it a go.
I know. But so presumably then, so you've got your guidelines, they would then make their way into conditions of consent in some ways? That's sort of how it then becomes a rule?
Look, it's a good question. Can I just... I'll give you an answer, but I just suppose I'm just asking, I'll come back on notice if what I've said is sort of not strictly correct. But, yeah, I mean, I think it helps. The sort of the idea of the guidelines is sort of what the government's expectations are. It's the sort of thing that probably would inform the development consent things. But I would need to just absolutely confirm that because, as I said, I'm not the planning minister, and the way in which they go, the guidelines are translated into conditions of consent, I probably just don't know enough about. But I'll find out and come back to you.
Thank you. And just before I hand over to my colleagues, the one that's caused a lot of concern, which I know I've spoken with you about before, is the Southern Highlands proposal and the gas-powered component to that. I guess would that sort of meet the guidelines? Is it something that... it's a tricky one. I know there's a lot of community concern about it. It is in the my understanding is in the planning process. Oh, sorry, it's not even. No, sorry. Just to be clear, there's 3 data centres, and 1 data centre is currently operational, but the other 2 that would make it the really big. If I'm understanding it correctly. The other 2 are in the pre-planning stage. So there's a whole lot of things that they would have to address. I understand the community concern, but I'm probably not in a position to say whether they would, because the guidelines aren't finalised. Yeah. I'm just probably not in a position to really provide much more comment other than this, will have to be dealt with. There's also obviously some issues with the Land and Environment Court and the council as well, which I'm reluctant to make comment about. Would the guidelines be, I guess, retrospective or no? Like if you've...
good question. I couldn't tell you because we just haven't decided.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already obviously got quite a lot of data centres that are already there. Retrospectivity is a bit close. Yeah, I'm just not in a position to tell you.
I mean, for ones that are not built yet but sort of have begun the planning. Okay. I'll hand over to Ms. Munro.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming, Minister. It's really helpful to have you and the work that you've done. I'm curious, so we've spoken a lot about a data centre strategy and a lot of witnesses have given evidence, and we've got a lot of submissions that call for a data centre strategy. Simon Draper said that there will be no data centre strategy, and I just wanted to clarify that is indeed the case.
Well, isn't there a discussion about whether it's guidelines versus a strategy? Is that right?
I think there is a distinction between a strategy and guidelines, and witnesses have also made that clear, where guidelines might relate to a requirement or suggestion for proponents, but a strategy actually looks at the broader New South Wales kind of spatial perspective, where you've got an understanding of how many gigawatts are available over the long term, where data centres should be placed, like whether there should be particular zones or whether they should be in particular industrial areas, so that we can actually give the public confidence that this rollout is going to be beneficial and not a massive white elephant or hugely disadvantageous to communities.
Yeah. Look, I think I suppose there's a few things to unpack there. I mean, I do think as government's considering all of the issues, there's guidelines, but there's also other policy work that's occurring. Obviously, in my area, the energy work is extremely important. It sits adjacent to and will necessarily have to be integrated into whether guidelines. If you think about it, the guidelines is partly for dealing with the planning process. There's also a whole lot of other policy work that needs to occur. Energy, I know you spoke to Minister Jackson, water, and how that comes together.
I guess that's what a strategy would ideally do. It would bring all of that together.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, yes. The final format of that, I'm just not in a position to it hasn't been decided in government, but all of those things are being considered.
So you mentioned before that the guidelines don't fall within your portfolio responsibilities. Whose portfolio responsibilities do they fall within?
They'd mostly be with planning.
Okay. So Minister Scully would be responsible for the ultimate form of those guidelines or whatever it is?
No, I mean, it's a fair question. I think... So we've gone out and consulted, and so my agencies have been involved with that, as has planning and those kind of things. But ultimately, there's sort of how do we manage data centres? And what I'm really saying is there's a number of different levers. There's within the planning system, and I think the guidelines kind of really address part of that. But it also could be broader than that. The fact is that government hasn't made a final decision. So I think, and again, I'd say that the kind of issues that you've raised in this inquiry will actually help inform that, to be honest. So that's good.
So there might be a strategy.
Well, the final form of whether you call it a strategy, whether you call it guidelines, whether you call it, what's also other policy work that comes out of my agency.
But you see the difference between guidelines for proponents and a broader strategic document.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, well, it depends. If you're arguing that you need it all in one document, that's one thing. If you're saying, whether there's other work and the way in which that's implemented and communicated, I suppose what I'm saying is that these can all be the same thing. I just am not in a position to say to you, I don't know what the document's going to, is there, what form it will take, I cannot tell you, but what I can give you, I suppose, confidence in is that all of the issues and the issues that you've been raising over a long period of time are all part of the consideration of government because we have to address them.
Mm-hmm.
Just on that point in terms of, and I'll let Ms Munro continue. So if we look at the 24-hour economy, for instance, we have a 24-hour economy strategy. Then below that, we then have these certain principles which are applied through planning as to how the 24-hour economy operates, and then what we've seen through Parliament. Don't you think that there's the need for both, effectively, both the strategy and also the guidelines?
What I'm saying is all of the elements of the work that's being done is there. What the final, what it's finally called and what sits alongside it, I'm not in a position to tell you because there hasn't been a final decision. But I take a note that you think we should have a document that says strategy.
Strategy.
Well, it's not...
Got to say it again.
This is not a semantic argument. This is actually how the public have confidence that there is an overarching plan and a vision for how this is rolled out. And I think that is severely lacking, not just with the community, but in industry, with Greenpeace, in the UDIA, like it really spans a huge gamut of witnesses. So I'm really not being semantic in this. It's a real concern.
Okay. We'll take it on board.
Yeah. Do you think that there is a real risk of you losing social license for data centres that puts at risk economic growth?
No. Other than the same issues that all large development proponents need to deal with, which is how are they dealing with community, how are they dealing with issues in terms of impact in the same way that they have to do with everything else. The government's going to be will say these are the principles. We've been clear about, some of what those are, and they do help with social licence. Whether we call it a strategy in the way that you're suggesting, I note your comments.
Okay, it's not just me suggesting it, just to be very, very clear.
No, but again, I would just go back to the fact that this inquiry will make recommendations and will, it's helpful.
So
I'm actually not trying to have a go at you. I'm trying to say this is actually fine. Sure.
Okay, so everything is fine.
You're asking for an answer. No. What you're trying to do is to try and sort of trap me into some gotcha moment.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to understand what's going on in government that can give everyone confidence that there's a
consultation paper that's out. There are principles that are set out in that. There is the development of guidelines and the consideration of other policy areas across government, because it's not just one minister. And that will come together and that will be communicated. What I'm saying to you is what the final form of that looks like, I cannot tell you because it's still under consideration, but I welcome your input.
Okay. And will there be, is there a timeline for when that will be released?
I can't, as I just said to Ms Boyd, it's a consideration of government. I'm not the lead minister on it. I'm not able to tell you what the time frame is.
Okay.
But as with everything, which is my standard answer, I always want everything done yesterday, as soon as possible.
In terms of power prices and the risks to electricity prices, there's been some suggestion that wholesale prices could go up by 26%. What's the work that you're doing at the moment to address those concerns?
Well, I think that's everything that we're looking at, the whole kind of principles and the idea about who pays and under what conditions, and the rule changes that we need to make is all about consumers not having to, and other energy users not having to pick up the cost, and how we actually manage that. So the work that the Commonwealth's doing, but the work that we're doing, the work that through the AEMC in terms of rule changes is occurring, is really trying to do that. The principle is very clear. Data centres need to pay their own way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks.
If I could just pick up on a couple of things. So we've heard a few different things in terms of the grid and data centres' contribution to it, both good and bad. Effectively, one of the arguments is that it will reduce the variability in the grid, and so therefore could actually reduce some of those price spikes. And is that something that you're seeing or your modelling is seeing, or is that something you can test?
There's as I'm sure the inquiry is aware, there's a fair amount of contestation about some of these issues. I think for us at the end of the day, we're guided by, the kind of AEMO projections, which is no doubt about, increased demand. Depending on which kind of model you use, it's quite significant. How do we actually manage that? I think that there are opportunities. This is not all downside at all. There are real opportunities. One of the challenges we have in terms of, renewable energy, and particularly the large renewable energy projects, is while we've had quite a few approved, actually getting them to financial close is proving to be a bit challenging because costs have risen over a period of time. There is the opportunity for offtake, and we also want data centres to basically, be investing in the renewable energy that we need. I think there's a sweet spot here. I'm not saying that we found it, but I think there is a sweet spot here, which is if you can actually PPAs with projects would actually, I think, help get them over the line for a lot of the financial close. And I think that's really a big, as the Energy Minister trying to convert the entire energy grid. That for me is the kind of interesting part of how we could make that work. I think there's also some opportunities for data centres in terms of minimum demand. So as we know, solar gangbusters in the day. We've got real challenges with the way in which the sort of coal-fired power stations work. They're not designed to go up and down in the middle of the day. There's challenges around the kind of market model that allows them to operate. Data centres providing some kind of minimum load is, again, I'm not pretending we've got the regulation or the way in which all of that could work, but I think I see that as actually also an opportunity to help us manage as we build out as much renewable as we can.
And a good segue in a sense in terms of the financial close argument. So we've heard some debate in the inquiry with some advocating that any data centre proposal should be underpinned by new energy generation and new renewable energy generation. Others have said that because of some of the issues around financial close in terms of existing renewable energy, approved energy projects, that we need to be a bit more flexible on that. I'm just interested in your thoughts or the government's thinking about how to approach that as well.
Yeah, it's a fair question, and it is something we'll have to weigh up. But look, my general view is if it's going to increase demand beyond what we've currently got, we are going to need to build out more, and that there needs to be a contribution in relation to that. Where you draw the line around the timing and how that would work with PPAs and those kind of things is probably, we need to give that some more careful thought. It's a bit sort of chicken and egg, which is that we need stuff that's built right now. PPAs would help us get over the line in terms of those existing projects, but then how you would then have to do the extra build out to deal with increasing demand. I think that's probably one of the questions that we need to answer. But my general view is that they should be bringing the energy.
Is that a question that will be answered through the government's public information about this?
Well, it's definitely part of the considerations, yes.
Okay. So just, is it something that data centre proponents can expect?
No, I think that look, people just need to be a little bit patient as government goes through its process and provides the information. I've sort of given an outline of the type of things that we're considering, and in a variety of ways, as I said, to go back to the previous conversation, what the document finally looks like and what's in and versus what sits with it across government is to be considered. What you can say to proponents is that you've got to pay your own. You've got to pay your own way. You've got to not impact on consumers, and ideally, it's helping. We need you to help build out renewable energy because we're trying to totally change the grid to renewables, and it's looking pretty good. But increased demand means that we have to build more, and we need a contribution for that.
Can I ask about diesel generators? And I think this is one of the things that I didn't know anything about until it was pointed out during this inquiry, that of course there's diesel generators backing up these data centres. Again, this was from the SO52. There was some information in there around EPA modelling showing that if all 8 large data centres in Sydney Basin ran their generators at the same time, the 1 hour NOx load would be 5 to 6 times that of all electricity generation in New South Wales and 5 to 6 times greater than motor vehicles in New South Wales. I understand that the idea is that they're not used unless they absolutely have to be, and we wouldn't expect them to be
And again,
used.
our preference is that they have battery backup.
Yeah, but I understand the EPA is currently considering a rule change that the regulatory framework should consider the number of sets and the pollutant load, not just the operation hours. Is that something that has made its way into...
Oh, look, the EPA
discussions?
are awesome, and they're all, and particularly around the kind of air quality issue has really been core business. We've got some excellent people there, who are really, technical experts as well as kind of understanding the health impacts of all of that. I think all of that kind of information is feeding into our considerations. I can't sort of say exactly what they'll do or where they'll ideally land. There are some sort of differences between sort of government policy and kind of independent regulated work. So, but what I would say to you is, yes, I'm aware that they're thinking about these things. Yes, they're all sort of feeding into the conversations that, all of it will need to be considered. Ultimately, through the planning process, again, the EPA has a pretty important role around providing advice as things are going through the EIS stage, and I would expect that at the very minimum, that's where those things are considered, but that also includes things like greenhouse gas emissions, which are also included.
Minister, just interested, do you receive notifications or that when the diesel generators are actually in use? Is that something that the EPA tracks, or there's any...
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know. Let me take it on notice. I personally have not received that. It's probably, in terms of where data centres are now and the number of, it's probably quite small, so it probably wouldn't be there. But let me take it on notice in terms of what the kind of notification situation is, because I just don't know. It's not come to me before. So,
because I think, obviously, if we can have battery backup, that's better. but I understand that for, with some of the current limitations, some of these proponents are saying that they have to have diesel as being the most reliable for them at this point. I'm thinking about, places like Muswellbrook where they have air pollution sort of monitoring and then alarms. This came up in the context of the one in Lane Cove where it's right near a school, and they were saying, we don't expect it to have to use those diesel generators, but if they did and it was a school day and you had all the kids outside, it'd be nice to have some sort of warning system or something. Is that something that you've...
It's not something that's, that's that sort of level of specificity I haven't had, but I'm happy to take it on notice and just see what's being considered.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. Did you have questions?
Maybe I could just ask one, Minister, and that this just follows on from an inspection we did this morning.
Where'd you go?
Ooh,
Yeah,
I don't think we're allowed to say.
We're not allowed to say.
Not allowed to say.
Oh,
I
sorry.
went somewhere
You went somewhere.
this morning.
Okay.
secret.
I hope it was fun.
And we had a look at a data centre that had been operating for a period of time. They have battery backup, and they had a diesel backup to that, which they said, other than for testing, they'd never used over a number of years.
That's good.
The other thing that struck me was they have no water discharge. I mean, they have a recycling mechanism. At what point do we identify things that are the gold standard, such as it would seem to me? And this was one inspection of this imaginary place we went to.
Which you may or may not have gone to.
Which we may or may not have been to. But it seemed to me that there seemed to be some gold standards there that we need to...
And again, I think that's part of sort of the principles, is our preference, do you bring your own energy? Do you have to pay for your own connections to cover it off? Do we, how are you having less of an impact on things like water? I know there's the recycled water. My understanding is there are other ones that use coolant. I mean, I think that's probably the big unknown in all of this. It's happening so quickly, and our regulation and planning systems have never really contemplated the speed with which we, need to be making these decisions in real time. The reason I say that is that there's then the issue around technology and change. Like even 3 years, batteries in the last 3 years have halved in price. And we now have opened our first 8-hour battery just a couple of weeks ago. So I think that the change in time is there. I think to go specifically to your question, the idea is that you want the least water use, you want renewable energy use, and you want coverage for... I think that's the gold standard. I think what government will need to work through is what are the mechanisms that we have to deal with those things through the planning system, but also through the energy system. That there's a bunch of stuff that how we deal with capacity and queues into capacity and those kind of things is also something we'll have to tackle.
Thank you.
May I ask a final question? Are you or is the government concerned about losing investment to Victoria and South Australia? South Australia has just announced a data centre strategy, even though they haven't actually released the actual strategy.
Have you seen it? Is it really a strategy?
I don't know.
Is it a series of documents?
I don't know. I really don't know, and I don't really rate Victoria's principles highly either. But they are they're generating a lot of investment for their state. Are you concerned that New South Wales is losing investment to other states, particularly Victoria and South Australia?
Look, there is a huge... Look, New South Wales is... My view is this. Of course, we don't like losing to other states in terms of investment, but my observation has been that there is a lot of interest in investing in New South Wales. I am not... given the amount of interest, that's not really a big concern for me. The concern for me is how do we actually manage this? How do we deal with it?
That's our concern too.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the investment part of it, I want more people to invest in renewable energy in New South Wales. That's probably my higher priority, to be honest. But no, I'm not really concerned about it. I think we've got a highly desirable location. I think we've got very smart people here. who are working. The thing that works against us, particularly within the sort of Sydney area, is just that land prices are so expensive. It's just more expensive to build here.
I don't think that works against us really, given the proponents that are already.
Yeah, this is what I mean. Like, I suppose what
There's
I'm saying
like
is
15 that have been approved through the IDA so far.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we've got we've got a system through the IDA. We're working through those issues. That was a long way of saying no. I'm not really concerned about it.
Okay.
All right. Any final questions? Otherwise, we will stick to time. Nope. Very
Great.
good.
Thanks
Thank
very much.
Thank you so much. Committee
When do you guys
Secretary
wrap
will be in
up?
touch. Sorry?
When will we have your report?
We don't know yet.
Ah,
We'll
there you go.
we'll have a chat after this and
Okay.
we'll
Is
work
that
it
a
out.
guideline or a strategy?
It's both a
very
strategy
deliberate,
and
Do you
no,
have
it's
findings
neither.
or recommendations?
Yes.
Both.
Both. Don't worry.
There
There'll
you
be
go.
both.
Terrific. Thank
Findings,
you.
recommendations.
Thank you.
Don't let us get in your way.
Hello. Thank you. We now have our final witness for today. If I could ask you to please state your name and position title and then swear either the oath or the affirmation.
Thank you. My name is Professor Penelope Crosley and I'm a Professor of Law at the University of Sydney with a particular focus on energy law. And I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Excellent. Thank you. And did you want to make a short opening statement at all?
I will make a very brief opening statement.
Go ahead.
So I just want to recognise that data centres are obviously an increasingly important part of our digital infrastructure. But as an energy lawyer, they're also very large, continuous system shaping electricity loads. And a core legal question is not whether the New South Wales should have them, it's rather whether the planning, electricity, water and transparency frameworks are adequate to ensure that the costs, the risks and the benefits are fairly allocated and don't undermine things like our legislated emissions targets, and that they're located and operated in ways that support rather than disorder our energy transition. So I was trying to think about where I could add value to this committee, and I think I can probably provide a little bit of assistance around particularly the legal and governance frameworks. I obviously I've never worked for a data centre operator, I've never worked for a network business, I'm not a water utility or consumer advocate in this space, but rather my experience is in energy law, electricity market governance, and also climate-aligned regulatory design. So in that sense, I kind of think about data centres as an interesting test case for the energy transition governance. We're talking about bringing on very large new electricity demand, questions of network cost allocation, firming, flexibility, emissions reductions obligations, as well as important questions of planning law, which, full disclosure, I am not an expert in, water infrastructure, community impacts and social licence. And so the challenge for us, and the challenge particularly for you all, is that you can't solve these on a project-by-project basis. It needs to be solved as an integrated governance framework.
Strategy.
Strategy, exactly. Strategy. Enforceable strategy. So,
What
yes.
about a guideline?
Very good. Thank you. Did you want to start, Ms. Monroe?
How to even start with your... Okay, so do you think that there are international governance models that offer good solutions in this space? And do you think that the renewable energy rollout offers any guidance on how we should deal with data centres as well?
Okay. I can tell you where not to look
Okay.
for good governance.
Yep.
And that would be Virginia. So apparently one of the Virginia school districts this morning instructed their teachers not to use the lights because they were concerned about not having sufficient electricity. So I think what we're seeing is that some places, like the EU is obviously doing a lot of work in this space. We're expecting a new energy efficiency directive out of the EU. We're waiting for that at the moment. We're also looking at places like Ireland, where there's been a fair amount of litigation around data centres. One of the things I did before coming here is I actually went and looked through some of the current data centre litigation occurring around the world to see what are the kind of issues that are cropping up consistently, because they're things that I think you might want to have on your radar. And they're things that this committee is already addressing. So things like, cumulative assessment, things like actually how do you ensure that your backup generators don't completely undermine your legislated emissions targets, which has been a common source of litigation in Ireland. How do you deal with challenges around, in the UK, they've had lots of process-based litigation where they feel like the proper process hasn't been followed, people haven't been heard. And in the EU space, we're seeing increasing calls for greater transparency. So they're the kinds of things where I think, particularly in the EU, the reporting and the transparent reporting of kind of the water usage, the electricity usage, and you can do that in a way that doesn't actually undermine commercial sensitivity, might be something you might want to have a look at and might be quite instructive. In terms of the second question about renewables, I think the challenge with renewables is that you've got to be careful that not all, when we're talking about using renewable generation in a data centre, you need to distinguish between using a power purchase agreement to purchase existing renewable generation versus new additional generation, and what that looks like, and whether you're going to aggregate it on an annualised basis or an hour-by-hour basis. So I think there are some important questions there around legislative design or guideline design or standards design, whatever you want to call it. But I think you need to be quite careful about what your intention is versus what the outcome's going to be.
So is that something that has to be pretty uniform across the state, or is it a project by project basis?
If I was designing it, I would make it uniform, just because it's easier to comply with, and then it's very clear as to what everyone needs to achieve. I would just impose an additionality requirement on renewable generation, whether that is through investment or through co-location and having on-site generation.
Yeah, okay. Do you see an investment impact with certain types of legislative requirements? Are there trends or patterns where legislation becomes too onerous and then investment doesn't flow through, or that it's too complex? Or could you talk us through any experience of that you've come across?
There is a great article which I can send on to the committee about actually the impact of moratoria in this space. So the impacts of having really sudden moratoria, even on a localised basis, what it's actually done to investment across that country. And so I think part of the challenge is that you're being asked to legislate in an area that is evolving very, very rapidly, and we're trying to play catch up. But at the same time, if you actually freeze the whole sector, that's been shown to have far greater impacts on an ongoing basis. And the case studies there that people have looked at include the Netherlands and Singapore. But there is a great article on it that I'm happy to share.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I ask just a question about, I guess, listening to the experiences in some overseas jurisdictions, what is the risk for us if we get this wrong in terms of if people do find themselves without sufficient energy or water or whatever? Is there a litigation risk? Is there how does that work?
There's absolutely a litigation risk, and there is absolutely a risk that you undermine social licence. And I think social licence in the energy space, we've seen some challenges out in the renewable energy zones, and this is an area that you really closely need to manage, because even if you don't get a successful litigation, the fact that you can get a threatened piece of litigation can actually be enough to be disruptive, or could slow down the process, or could attract political attention that may undermine a project. And in terms of this space, I think the real risk in New South Wales that no one I've heard talk about is around private nuisance. So with the High Court decision in Hunt Leather, you actually potentially have the ability for neighbours who are impacted by a neighbour's use of their land in a way that causes a substantial impact to neighbouring landholders, they could potentially bring a claim. And the threshold after the recent High Court decision, I think, is actually probably been lowered, and it's become easier for plaintiffs to bring those kinds of claims. And I would suggest that if I was investing in a $1 billion data centre in New South Wales, I'd probably actually be looking for statutory authorisation rather than just a planning consent, because I would be nervous.
So are we talking things like noise and heat and...
Yeah, potentially. I mean, if it's a perfectly closed system, you don't need to worry about things like pollutants escaping. But it could be the noise, it could even be construction works. If construction of your data centre takes too long and is deemed to be not conveniently done, which means done in an unreasonable way or not done in the most efficient way, and causes kind of unreasonable and ongoing loss or damage to a neighbour, that's potentially going to be subject to a claim.
Right.
Isn't that potentially an issue for any business across New South Wales? Or?
Yep.
Yep.
After the recent High Court decision, absolutely. Any large... But I mean, my background is I used to be a project finance lawyer. If I was investing a lot of money in a large piece of infrastructure, I would be nervous. And that would be anywhere across Australia, so you don't need to worry that the Victorians have an advantage here.
So why did that change? Like, what in that case actually shifted the
test?
level? Yeah, the test.
Some judges believe that they have stated the law as it always was. Many legal academics believe that we've had a sudden shift in the law.
Right.
Matters of interpretation. But I certainly, as somebody who used to work a lot in this space, I think the fundamental test has shifted.
Mm-hmm.
So you spend less time doing... the onus is now much more on the project developer to show that they have done it in a manner that is conveniently done.
Interesting.
So it's just the onus has shifted a bit.
Have you seen any impacts of that on
Not
projects
yet.
so far? When was the decision?
February, I think, from memory.
Okay. Interesting.
And would it help in terms of, a defence against that if there'd been better consultation? Is there any kind of interaction with consultation?
So the only defence that's really available to that is statutory authorisation, and planning permission has repeatedly been found by the courts not to be a statutory authorisation. It requires a specific Act of Parliament.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Yeah, the potential for infrastructure development is huge, the impacts. And I mean, we used to talk about private nuisance being threatened a lot around wind developments. If you think a wind development can cause a private nuisance claim, there's no reason to believe that a data centre wouldn't also.
Yeah, right. And can that... Oh, sorry, sounds like a silly question, but the... just because when you were explaining this, you started off with the kind of, your neighbour or whatever. But presumably it could be two companies where one company is interfering with the other company's use of their land.
So the principle is basically you have to have neighbouring landholders. So it's a property-based tort.
Yeah.
But yes.
And then they could claim damages to their business, not just their...
Quite commonly what you go for is an injunction.
Right.
Is a primary remedy.
So then they have to stop. Right. So you've got your $1 billion data centre that you then have to...
That has received full planning permission, full consent, complies with all of the requirements set down. You can be in full compliance and it can still be a private nuisance.
Yeah, right. There you go.
Going back to your opening statement around are our governance systems adequate? How do you rate our governance systems? Are they adequate for data centre rollout to be benefit of benefit to the community, but also obviously driving investment?
Look, the one thing that I would change if it were me who had the power that you all have, is I would move from the power megawatt trigger into state significant development into a multi-factor performance-based framework. So looking at power usage efficiency, water source emissions, and also a cumulative test. I think you can't evaluate projects like this on a project-by-project basis when you can have cumulative impacts. And it's very hard to say to proponent number 15 that actually you're the person who tips all of this over the edge rather than proponent number 2.
Yeah.
And that's both consistent with both the government consultation paper on point, but also the EU's shift. They're moving to a much more kind of performance-based framework. I think the other challenge in this space is that obviously New South Wales law in this space is very much focused on the development rather than as an infrastructure allocation tool. And then you've also got layered on top the complexity that is the national electricity law and the national electricity rules, which New South Wales has considerably less control over. And you've almost got a bit of a mismatch where, you know, you could have a beautiful project, but actually some of the things around, connections, access, aren't actually within the control solely of the New South Wales government. And they sit under the national electricity rules. And I know I was reading this morning that the state government and Transgrid are proposing a rule change. That mismatch is hard, and it's hard to manage, and there is a risk that stuff will fall between the cracks. And I don't know how you fix that.
Great.
Sorry. You're very smart people. I'm sure you'll come up with something.
So just to that point, in terms of, are there any examples that you see at the moment where things have fallen through the cracks already?
So this will be a bit of a strange one, and it's not one that is within your purview to fix, but say a data centre requires deep augmentation of the grid. And the data centres, I've read the submissions, have said to you, we've actually engaged in some of that deep augmentation work and we've funded it. And we've funded it up to, I can't remember the exact percentage, it was 85% we're funding, and the other 15% the cost is socialised. The challenge there is that that payment to the network service provider is treated as income at the moment. So even though they're paying 85% of the cost of that deep augmentation, that's then an income for the network service provider that gets taxed. And who pays the tax on the income from the network service provider? Well, that's socialised cost across the community. So in fact, even though it looks like they're paying 85% of the deep augmentation cost, when you factor in the additional tax burden that gets socialised,
50%.
About 65 apparently. And so the Australian Energy Regulator is having to have conversations with the ATO about the fact that, you know, these things need to be fixed. So it's things like that that you wouldn't necessarily consider. And, you know, data centres will come in and say, we are paying all of these deep augmentation costs. And in fairness, they are paying a substantial proportion of them. But then we've got these rules that kind of undermine some of that and end up with consumers paying more. And you don't want that. I mean, I think there is broad agreement that the costs of data centres need to be borne by data centres rather than by households or small businesses or even other large commercial and industrial users. So,
So are there groups of experts who are identifying, like working together to identify these gaps on any sort of ongoing basis, or at the moment is it just disparate elements of industry and perhaps some academics, or is there any coordination that you're aware of that looks at these regulatory gaps?
not that I'm aware of. I think the challenge is that energy sector regulation evolves so quickly generally anyway, that layering in the complexity of a data centre, which also has water regulatory complexity and land regulatory complexity, is just, the pace is so rapid, nobody's on top of any of it.
So to that point, is there anything that has preceded this, which has been like it, where we have been able to catch up quickly in terms of the regulatory landscape that we should be looking at?
where we haven't been able to
Where
catch
we
up?
have.
Where we have caught up.
Let's go glass half full rather than half empty.
I think when batteries were first introduced, we weren't very good at regulating batteries, and we tried to fit them into an existing category rather than actually regulating them properly. I think the opportunity that is presented here is if you came up with something that was really considered, really kind of looking at the cumulative impacts, just one document.
Like a strategy.
Like a strategy. but like all in one document, but also it needs to be enforceable. Because one of the challenges is that you assess these projects and they say, well, we're going to reduce our electricity consumption, or we'll have all of our electricity consumption as additional, and then that kind of goes into the bottom drawer. And because those metrics aren't publicly available, nobody can actually hold that proponent to account when in 12 months' time they say, actually, that technology we were going to put into that data centre is now obsolete. We're going to rip that out, we're going to put something else in. And I think there needs to be some way of holding those, like if you're going to rely on something to get planning permission, that should also be something that you should be held accountable for down the track. And we should be able to measure it, and it should be public. We're not very good at transparency in the energy sector.
So is the EU, with that transparency push, are they expecting pushback, or is that then a standard that we can take up and not expect to be sidelined for if there are other more lax regions or legislative jurisdictions?
Look, I think New South Wales in particular is attractive because we are politically stable, fairly geologically stable. There's a lot going for us in terms of attracting investment. The EU has had transparency and reporting requirements in place since 2024. They've been very successful from what I understand, and they're about to expand those out. I was trying to find out what they're about to expand them out to. I wasn't able to find that yet. But certainly if they've had it in place for almost 2 years, there's no reason to believe that we shouldn't have something similar in place.
Further questions?
Just on I think in your opening statement you mentioned about the litigation in Ireland with regards to backup generators and emissions. So what was the threshold? Because the previous discussion we had today was about them only being used in fairly rare circumstances, and therefore it was kind of like fairly benign, but this would indicate that it was somewhat significant, I would have thought, if there was successful litigation.
So the cases, and I can send you the citations. The most interesting one for your purposes is probably going to be which one would I give you? So there are 3 cases from Ireland that have all referenced climate, and about whether whether there was due regard given to climate policy, and whether there were challenges around using gas. So in Ireland, there has been a big push to make any kind of backup generation battery and also all additional renewables. I think the challenge with the backup generation, particularly the backup diesel generation, is you don't build 50, 60 odd backup diesel generators unless you think you might need it. And so some of the litigation coming out of the US in particular is suggesting that actually, rather than treating those as kind of an ancillary emergency backup power system, you actually need to look at how often it is being used and think about what that means in terms of particularly nitrous oxide emissions and various other emissions. So I'm not sure if that helps.
So was the pretext for the litigation then the fact that you went to the cost of having it means it is going to be used to a certain extent, therefore it's a problem? Or is it based on actual emissions data coming out of the generators?
So the concern there is whether, in looking at things like on-site gas-powered backup generation, there was sufficient regard to both indirect and cumulative CO2 emissions, is what they're focused on. So the fact that it's being built
Yeah.
means that does it need to be addressed? Does it not need to be addressed?
Because that's quite handy to inform our direction, I guess, because we heard from the Minister before who said she prefers battery backup, but maybe we need to do something more to ensure that that preference manifests itself in reality.
I think the challenge is with some of the Irish litigation is that not all the claims were successful.
Right.
It's important to note.
Yep.
And that having regard to doesn't mean that it has to be determinative of. And so I think, though, that where we're seeing it more is in the US cases, where they're saying, look, actually, if you're putting in lots and lots of diesel generators and you're actually running those diesel generators, that's no longer ancillary. That's no longer an emergency provision. And I think what you've got to be careful about is the emissions around off-road diesel and about how well regulated they are.
Yeah.
So
Of
at
course,
what
the
point do you
proponents
trigger?
would say just because they're embedded assets and they're there all the time,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that they're non-emergency, because we can't afford to have any downtime, therefore we have to have them there all the time. Doesn't mean they get used a lot, you know.
Yeah, and I think you need to distinguish between kind of testing and maintenance
Yeah.
versus how often they're actually being run, and that question will also depend on where your data centre is being located and about, you know, are there power shortfall issues? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And if there are other ways to offset that, potentially.
Exactly.
Like,
which,
it's not ideal, obviously, but if there are ways to offset.
and the other thing to think about is actually I saw in the terms of in the terms of reference, there was a reference made to circular economy. It's far easier to recycle a large lithium battery at end of life than it is many other technologies.
Interesting.
Much more economic to do so as well.
Well, I think any further questions? Are we good?
I think unless you wanted to just go into any more detail about that performance-based, multi-factor, state significant development, if there's anything further you wanted to expand on.
And if I could also, just in thinking about that, but it was something that when you proposed, like, is it any different for data centres compared to any other state significant development effectively? Like, I understand in terms of the megawatt assessment, but when you're looking at the cumulative impacts and the like, that this would largely apply to many state significant developments similarly, wouldn't it?
I think the difference is the load. So the difference is this is a large inverter-based load. It's asynchronous, and the problem with this is that if you get the electricity side of it wrong, the power side of it wrong, and they don't have the ride-through, which is that current Australian Energy Market Commission rule change where they're trying to improve the ability to ride through. I mean, there was some horrific number of data centres that all simultaneously went offline in Virginia and knocked 1.6 gigawatts of power off the grid because they had a cascading fault, and they respond in seconds and they knock them all off. That is not what you want. And I think that's how you differentiate these types of developments from other state significant developments. Other state significant developments are unlikely to cause a blackout if you get it wrong. This one, potentially, and potentially also the land impacts as well, I suspect, and the regions and the clustering. The fact that we know that we're going to cluster them. The only other point I probably make that I haven't made yet is around the phantom demand issue and about some ideas that you might want to think about. Like, you might want to think about, in order to put somebody into the connection queue, might you require them to have a PPA, or might you require them to have certain feasibility studies, and could that then be shared with our EMO? I'm aware that of the 44 gigawatts that was in the connection queue last year, 16 gigawatts have apparently fallen off the queue, but an additional, I think it's 53, have gone in into the queue. So the queue, I think, at the moment is sitting at around 67. And so it's just an area which is evolving really rapidly, and it's really hard to get hard numbers because people are so worried about getting access to the queue. You're kind of doing these speculative bids that fall off. We see it quite commonly in the energy sector. This is where you do see this kind of behaviour. We saw it with early wind farms where people would bid into the queue and then not actually build. It's hard. But I look forward to reading your final report.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you.
That was very useful. To the extent there are any supplementary questions or questions taken on notice, Committee Secretary will be in touch. But that concludes our time with you. It also concludes our hearing for the day. Thank you.
Thank you.